Doing today, and Facebook Living today about the Conscious Leadership book, my next book that's coming out this week. In fact, the official launch is going to be on Saturday this week, and I invite you all to grab a glass of wine or beer or coffee wherever you are in the world and join us for that as well. It's literally going to be 2.5 hours after this time on Saturday this week. I thought this week, in order to celebrate the launch of the book, and because the book is incredibly poignant as well, meaning that it's absolutely right for the time, that what I would do is share a whole lot of concepts from the book for everybody as well. And I wanted to start by acknowledging what's going on in the world at the moment, acknowledging people that are in lockdown, acknowledging people that are away from their families, and acknowledging people that are really getting in and doing all of the things that are making us succeed and survive during these times. And it's interesting that as we look back at history, certain names pop up from all sorts of cultures around the world, from Australia, Truganini, the last Aboriginal, the one who was put in chains and the last full-blooded Aboriginal to ever be in Australia. I mean, millions of Aboriginal people, but she's the one we remember. William Wallace is a great one for us to remember as well, because Braveheart, not Robert the Bruce, most people don't remember him, they remember Braveheart. Jacques de Molay, the head of the Templars. There were many Grand Masters of the Templars, but he was the one that was burnt at the stake. So all of these people that contributed to the world in many ways, Atahualpa, which was the last Incan king and the one that was killed after doing a deal with the Spanish, and then his body disappeared, never to be found again. These people throughout history contributed, and we're going to see today in this era of global crisis, more people stepping up as well. And I want to mention this because the foreword to my book was written by an amazing lady who some of you know, and that lady's name is Maya Shahani. Now, I was lucky enough to have met Maya 15 years ago, and I first met her in India, and she's become like my second mother. But just to give you a little bit of her background and the reason why I asked her to write the foreword to Conscious Leadership, before I get into the stories that I want to share with you today, which is going to be a combination of some ancient wisdom, a combination of some bit of storytelling, and a combination of some things that are right for the time as well, is that Maya was born in these days what is known as Pakistan, and it was the part of India just before they abridged it there, just after the Second World War. And then they made all of the people who were not of a certain religion, as they have done it throughout history, leave the country. And her and her mother, her father had already gone to India to set up a new life. Her and her mother and her sisters and brothers literally were leaving India on foot, climbing across the mountains. And it was a terrible night, and there was a huge flood, the river flooded, and Maya spent that night as a baby in her mother's arms in 2 feet of water in a shack, whilst her sister and brother stood next to her to stop from drowning that night. And that's how they entered India all of those years ago. And then Maya went from really being that person who had nothing to winning Miss Bombay at the time, finding a husband, then creating wealth, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about that on today's call as well, and then became what is truly a real-life slumdog millionaires. So it doesn't matter what from humble beginnings we all come from. All of us have our own story, and they're either his story or her story. But today, those stories are so much more important, as we need to become conscious leaders in ourselves. And I wanted to start today with the story of Alexander the Great. And for those of you that are watching me live on Facebook, just excuse me for a minute, because I do have another audience as well, and that's on YouTube. And I'm going to be sharing the screen with them, so I can't do a screen share on Facebook. I tried, but the software wouldn't work. So firstly, what I want to do is just let you know on those of you that can see this, and Nicola, hopefully you're there and you can put up the link to the Conscious Leadership book. You can buy it pre-sale. We've got a special deal, really cool price going just for the first week up until the first week after it goes live, which is this coming Saturday. But the link for that is a bit.ly link. So that's bit.ly/conscious leadership book. So you'll find it in your feed there and it's up on the screen at the moment. But now coming to Alexander the Great, considered one of the greatest leaders of all time. And yes, he conquered much of the known world, but his nemesis was a Persian king called Darius. And Darius really was the ruler of the world at that time. And I guess it was fair to say, and this is all in the introduction in the Conscious Leadership book, but I guess it's fair to say that Darius really saw Alexander the Great as a bit of a mosquito on his arm. And he brought around 180,000 of his troops to crush Alexander, and Alexander sent him off scampering. In fact, as the history books say it, Darius arrived at that battle with his golden chariot. I call it like his golden Humvee in today's age, his designer Humvee. He had all his other chariots behind him. He brought his wives, he brought his children, he brought his mother, and he brought much of his gold. So when he finally realized that the battle was turning and he scampered off running on his golden chariot with Alexander in full pursuit of that. And unfortunately, Alexander got his wives, his children, his mother, and a lot of his gold. But instead of doing what most barbarians would do in those days, which is, rape the women, kill the children, etc., etc., Alexander actually was really magnanimous. He said to them, well, you women are queens, you children are princes and princesses, so that's the way you're going to live at my court. So he treated them not as captives, but as equals. In fact, after some time, he even started calling Darius's mother, because of course Alexander was away from his own mother. Time went on. Darius, of course, wanted his family back and wrote to Alexander many times. Alexander refused, and this ensured another battle on a place called the Plain of Arbela. Now, the Plain of Arbela, if you like, is a plain that is now in northern Iraq, so none of us can go and visit it too much at the moment. It would be a little dodgy to do that, even today. But they met there. This time Alexander and he'd lost a lot of his original Thracians and Macedonians that he took into the original battles with him. And he had to supplement that with people that he got from local areas. So, imagine being Macedonian and most of your army is Turkish. I mean, it's probably, you don't think that they're going to react too well. But in that, Darius had raised another huge army, apparently about 108,000 people. Alexander was down to 35. Now, as history goes, the night before the battle, Alexander did some prayers with one of the wise men. He had a clear dream about the battle, which he decisively won. And unlike what most leaders would do, he actually slept in late that day, and he got up late. And everybody said, why aren't you up early? He said, because we're going to win. And surely enough, the battle, even though Darius brought elephants and this new machinery and, chariots with the spikes on and all of that sort of stuff, Alexander decisively won the battle. And Darius this time had to escape the battlefield on horseback. Now, after Darius ran, and he really did run in fear from the battlefield, he was chased by some of his generals, particularly one of his main generals called Bessa. And these guys captured Darius and they held him for ransom and basically said to him, we're going to sell you to Alexander. And Darius said, well, I would rather be with Alexander captive than with you bunch of traitors. So that didn't go down too well with Darius's generals, and they basically threw a bunch of javelins at him and impaled him on the back of a chariot. And Alexander found him 2 hours later. He was dead, but Alexander was furious. And he was furious that this great leader the king of the greatest empire on the planet, which was Persia, which, by the way, Alexander had taken at that stage and ensconced himself in Babylon, which was the capital, that this great king had been mutinied by generals. So he sent his troops out and he went on several weeks rampage where he found these traitors, and he had them brought to him in Babylon, and he had them firstly disfigured, not very pleasant, and then he brought Darius's mother and some of his children out, and he tied these people to palm trees, strung them back, and then allowed Darius's mother to chop the palm trees that held them, and they flung into bits into the afterlife. And so Alexander became, at that point, he became Alexander the Great, not only the conqueror of the world, the founder of the Library of Alexandria, somebody who'd stretched the borders all the way from basically France down through Asia Minor and into India and all of that. Not only had he become that, but he'd become a household name in the time before the internet. However, here's how the story plays out. He was 26 at the time. So what did Alexander do for the next 7 years before he died? Basically, he partied his ass off. He really fell amongst drinking, cavorting with different people, bad deals, all of that sort of thing. And it ended up that one day, one of his greatest generals, who was also a general to Alexander's father, told Alexander after a night of partying what he thought of him, and Alexander retaliated by, in a drunken state, picking up a spear and killing him in front of his group of people, which included other generals. Now, this was something he instantly lamented. He instantly realized what he'd done. He tried to save him, but the damage was done. His general, his mentor, and one of his father's best friends had been killed and at his sword. And this threw Alexander into a deep depression. He went into weeks of drinking, and as the history book said, one day he drank 20 glasses of wine, which were goblets in those days, and he fell into a sleep from which he never awoke and died at age 33, poor, bitter, and broken. So what's the moral of this story? The moral of this story is that we all chase success. All of us are chasing success, even in these times that are tough, even when we're maybe at home, locked down, we're concerned about our business cash flow, we're concerned about our personal health, the health of others, and everything like this. But many of us find success. But Alexander wasn't a conscious leader. He was in many respects an incredibly unconscious leader and ill-prepared for the responsibility of leadership, because leadership isn't one battle. It isn't two battles. It isn't even a series of battles. It's an ongoing relationship that we all have, if you like, with the greater good and our world in the greater good as well. So with that, I want to move on to something that's relevant for all of us here, and that is wealth. And at the moment, many of our wealths are hemorrhaging. I said on one of my Facebook Lives recently, I looked at my retirement portfolio and it had dipped 30%. Graciously, it's come back a little bit, but all of our wealth has been hit. Of course, if you're making face masks and hand sanitizer, you might be having some sort of monopoly at this moment of time. But wealth is nothing more, folks, than controlled time. So I'll say that again. And a lot of the great people, the Edisons of the world, the JP Morgans, the people that really truly knew and understood how to make wealth, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the nasty names that people don't want to say these days, they understood that wealth is controlled time. Now, most of us think that we can't control time. And I haven't got the time this morning to go into how to control time, but I can give you an example of how time can shift. When you go out on that first date, it seems that that first date with the person that ends up being the love of your life is a date that just goes on and on and on forever. But the minute's over, it feels like it was a flash. When you stood in those queues at airline counters waiting to board your plane, it seemed like an eternity. but it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. When you go to the dentist, many of you, it seems like an eternity. When you do something that's fantastic, sometimes you're so involved in it, the time stops, but afterwards you can't even remember what happened. So the secret here is to know how and understand how to control time. And so I see, and we're in South Africa at the moment, I see on the news every night, there's not enough news to make up half an hour of news here. In fact, the reason why is there's no sport and there's no weather, meaning the weather is computer generated now because there's no weather person standing there because they're not needed at the moment. So what do they do with the last 10 minutes of the news? They put up nice homemade videos that people have made on how they're spending their time at the moment. But time is a gift. That's why we live in the present time. It is a present. So it's great to run around and make silly videos and have drinking competitions online and lots of things that you see that people are doing, and I'm not begrudging that. But this gift of time is to really for you and I to look at is what we are doing at the moment. Is it consciously getting us to where we want to be? Is it giving us the two top things, the two top emotions that any person could feel in life, which is joy and love on a daily basis? Is it serving our greater good? Is it allowing us to use those precious gifts that make us different from anybody else on the planet? So if wealth is controlled time, then you and I should be looking at what we're doing with our time now and in the future more than ever. In 2009, I was lucky enough, and those of you that are listening to this on YouTube will be seeing the slides I'm using at the same time, lucky enough to meet a fantastic guy, Greg Braden. Many of you know Greg. I've met him a number of times over the years. Initially, I met him actually in Alaska, and then we met him in Peru. I've got one of the photos up of him and I at the moment. But here's one of the things that he said, and I'm going to read this, and this was a note that I actually wrote in my journal in 2009 after meeting Greg. He said, the purpose of enterprise, and enterprise meaning business, if you like, and one's enterprise, whether it's a job or a company that they own or anything like this, in other words, being a leader, the purpose of enterprise is to collect consciousness, because consciousness speeds up time. Now, we've seen that. I reiterated again in the book Conscious Leadership, but I wrote about it in some depth in a book called What If You Were God many years ago. And I talk about the 7 stages of human development, or 7 stages of development on the planet. For the basis of time, I'm just going to give you the last few. We had the Industrial Revolution. That went on for a couple of 100 years. Then we had the era of computers. By the way, if you wonder what was before Industrial Revolution, it was faith, the era of faith. That went on for about 1700 years. Then Industrial Revolution. Then the era of computers and technology, about 30 years. And then the era of consciousness. And suddenly, if you look at it, we have a J-curve happening in human history. Why is that happening? The J-curve of learning, understanding, being able to travel around the planet. And of course, the downside of that is spread of disease and the coronavirus and things like that. It's because the purpose of enterprise is to collect consciousness, and consciousness speeds up time. So for us becoming more conscious and understanding the imprint that we have and choosing what to do with our time at this point in history right now, and I'm not talking about tomorrow, I'm talking about today. When you get off this call, reassess what you're doing with your time. In fact, when I get off this call, we're on another webinar with clients, and then after that, we're spending 5 hours planning today. Okay, it's a work day. We're spending 5 hours planning because we're going to be consciously looking at our enterprises and what we do with our time as well. There was a fantastic book written a number of years ago, about 100 years ago now, and it was by a guy called Wallace D. Wattles. It's called The Science of Getting Rich. And I'm talking a lot about wealth today because wealth is related very much to consciousness. We're going to shift from wealth because wealth is not only wealth in terms of what's in your bank account, it's what's in your skill set, it's what's in your relationships, it's what's in your knowledge bank, it's all sorts of things. So don't particularly just take it and make it about money. But let's talk about the science of getting rich. What Wallace D. Wattles said, which is a fantastic statement all those years ago, is he says, the person that owns all he wants, and I'll put he or she because it's 100 years later now, the person who owns all he or she wants to live all the life that he or she is capable of living is rich. So it's not about what's in your bank account. It's about how you live your life. The person who owns all he or she wants to own, to live all the life he or she is capable of living, is rich. So therefore, if you're bound by geography, if you're bound by family considerations, if you're bound by not being able to get a visa, if you're bound by having to stay inside because of a global pandemic, if you own all that you need to own to live the life that you are capable of living, then you are rich. So don't worry about what's in your bank account. Just consider how lucky you are right now to have what you have. And with that, I'm going to move to one of my other favorite quotes in the book, which is in length, and I'm going to have to read this one. And this comes from the greatest Japanese samurai ever, Miyamoto Musashi, who lived in the 16th century. How do we know he was the greatest samurai ever? Because he had over 90 fights to the death, which he survived. So 1 in 90 is not bad. And he lived to the ripe old age of being in his 90s. He gave up the way of a samurai. He wrote nearly 100 books on his life and on his philosophies. And he lived for many, many years in a cave, considering his life and considering his way as a samurai. And you may recognize some of this as I read it. It's from a book called The 5 Rings of Power. And this book was a book that I originally obtained in about 2005. And yeah, I'm reading it. This is in an old journal that I have from about 2007. And this is in this journal. And it says here from Miyamoto Musashi, the flow of energy of the universe can be harvested by anybody, providing they have the strength of mind to summon the flow. I'll say that again. The flow of energy of the universe can be harvested by anyone, providing they have the strength of mind to summon the flow. In doing so, we must appreciate that this is not our energy, but we are merely a vehicle used for it to flow through. We cannot use the energy for personal gain, pride, or at any stage, ego. So we can grasp the flow, but we cannot use it for personal gain, pride, or ego. We must use it with humility and not for personal gain or wealth, meaning traditional money. If we tap into this energy, the universal energy, the flow of energy of the universe, if we tap into this energy, we must be very sure of our purpose, for in it we unleash incredible power. I find that to be one of the most beautifully written pieces of ancient wisdom ever. And if you feel you've heard it before, may the force be with you, because George Lucas took from Miyamoto Musashi in writing the original version of Star Wars. But what Musashi is saying is he's talking about consciousness, and he's talking about the fact that there is this universal energy, the Akashic records, the records of everything there ever was, everything that there ever is, and everything that there ever will be. And you can channel that through you, but not for personal gain, not for ego and not for your own power, because you have to be careful, because in it you will unleash incredible power, and that may not be good. So for many of you, being still in the moment, being meditative, listening to some great things on YouTube, watching stuff like this, things that are going to trigger your thinking, grabbing a copy of Conscious Leadership, which, by the way, is in 3 different parts. And part 1 in a book on leadership is all about energy. Part 2 is all about environment. And part 3 is all about enterprise. So I'm really looking at the first 5 or 6 chapters in the book as helping you to understand the construct of energy. We get deep into quantum physics, Michio Kaku's stuff, Stephen Hawking, some of the other great quantum physicists. And then we move from that into environment and what we create around us. And you have a choice, even though you may be at home at the moment, you have a choice of what you bring into your environment. It's not just the physical space of the environment, it's what you bring into your mind, what you bring into your soul, what you listen to. Are you listening to great music? Are you listening to rubbish? Are you watching the news and every day feeling heavier, or are you lightening up? So with that, I want to move from Miyamoto Musashi to another quote. And I'm just moving my Facebook Live a little bit to the side there because I'm doing this on YouTube at the same time, and I'm using slides on YouTube just to make it more visually interesting for people. I was going to do that for you guys on Facebook Live as well, but we couldn't get them to work today. So this is a quote from 3114 BC, and it's in the book, the I-ching. I have a copy of the original I-ching sitting over there on my shelf. I should have brought it for you, but I've shared it on one of my other Facebook Lives. Because the wise men of the past thought out the order of the external world down to its ultimate constituents, do you think that they may have known about atoms and bacteria and microbes? Because the wise men of the past, this is somebody writing this 5,000 years ago, talking about their wise men of the past. Because the wise men of the past thought out the order of the external world, the world outside of us, down to its ultimate constituents, and the laws of their own inwardness, down to its deepest core, they succeeded in understanding fate. Wow, this is such beautiful ancient wisdom. I'll read it for you again. Because the wise men of the past, remember it was written 5,000 years ago, so they're talking 10, 20,000 years ago, thought out the order of the external world down to its ultimate constituents, meaning they understood the simplest of things. They understood a flower, they understood bacteria, they understood a raindrop, they understood atoms and electromagnetics and all the things we know today as quantum physics. And they understood the laws of their own inwardness, the way they operated as an individual, their own consciousness, their own soul, down to its deepest core. They succeeded in understanding fate. Now, that's a fascinating statement, because what it really means is, it means this: if you consciously understand the way the world works, the macro world at a micro level, and you understand that reality is fractal, as scientists are talking about now, and you understand that there's different dimensions, and we talk about that. I talk about that in Conscious Leadership and give you some examples of that as well. And we understand that all of us may not actually be viewing the world that we're viewing right in front of us. In fact, for many of us, our world is incredibly different. So I'm choosing, through the time of lockdown and coronavirus and everything like that, not to be flippant, but to feel light. I'm refusing to accept that as a reality. I'm doing business as usual, and business is as usual. Whereas people who are focused on the problem are going to realize more of the problem. So therefore, that success in understanding fate is really no more than saying the ancient of the ancient, the people who lived tens of thousands of years before the ancient Chinese, who captured this statement, understood consciousness that we create our own lives, we create our own realities, and we create our own world. And of course, the whole basis of me writing this book, Conscious Leadership, is what I read in Forbes magazine in 2016, which was a great definition of conscious leadership, which I share in, I think, the enterprise section of the book, which is all about making a difference, legacy, it not be about trying to save the world, but it being about taking the journey within to really truly understand yourself. And that's what this is. For those of you that are on the YouTube, I've got a photo here, for those of you that are not, of an 80-something-year-old man wearing a suit. And this is the role of the CEO at the moment. When I say CEO, I'm not only talking the CEO of the biggest companies on the planet, I'm talking the CEO of the smallest companies on the planet. You, the CEO of Self-Incorporated. That's who you are. And your role at the moment is to be nothing more than a custodian of our future. And the consciousness that I'd love to see each and every one of us bring right now to the planet over the ensuing weeks and months is for us to understand that if we are prepared to take the deeper journey within and not be so flippant with our time and play games or watch too much rubbishy TV, which I like to watch as well. And I like to play games. I like to play my guitar. But if to do that deep work inside, then we'll become custodians of great wisdom for the future. This is the first time since the Spanish flu in 100 years and since the great plagues of Europe in the 14th century and 13th century that us as humanity has had to really face what could be an exponential growth rate in pandemics. And don't think that just because the growth rate's going down in your country, that when we all come out of this lockdown, it isn't going to jump. Of course, it's going to jump again. So we may be going through this several times over the next few years. So our role is custodians of knowledge. Our role as CEOs and leaders is custodians of the great value systems that we hold dear. The value systems of our faith, the value systems of what we know to be true in our own hearts, which to me is so much stronger than any building that represents a faith as well. And Lundy, my partner, who most of you know, talk about this as not having brokers to God, but why can't we have a direct line and just talk to our gods and our universe ourselves? I want to finish up today's live streaming to you guys with just a saying from an Albanian. And there's probably not too many Albanian wise people that have made it into the mainstream over the past little while. But this one, was born in about 1870, died in about 1940. And during the First World War, along with other people, he came together and started creating these centers of wisdom, which were just clandestine meetings in people's lounge rooms. And we can do that by Zoom these days, clandestine meetings in people's lounge rooms. And this person, his name was Ouspensky. And I want to finish with this because this coming Saturday, we'll be launching Conscious Leadership. I'm going to be reaching out again. We'll do another one of these Facebook Lives tomorrow morning, same time, on some different material. And then again on Friday with some different materials. Saturday, 2 hours after this time, we're going to be, and 2.5 hours after this call started, we're going to be actually doing our official launch. That's when the book will go live. It's selling really well. Thank you so much, guys, for buying it. But if you want to help me get, even more of an Amazon bestseller rate, then Saturday is the time to buy. Saturday, the 18th, is the time to buy and time to refer it to your friends. The link is in your feed there as well. I'll put the link back up at the end of the YouTube just so people can see that as well. But to finish with Ouspensky, and I think this is a great way to finish up this call because this is the greatest wisdom and the simplest wisdom of everything I can share with you today. Consciousness cannot evolve unconsciously. How's that for cool? I'll say that for you again. Consciousness cannot evolve unconsciously. And consciousness has developed. And I talked about on one of my Facebook Lives the coming together of the harmonic convergence on the 14th of August, 1987, the work of Jose Arguelles, the work of Deepak Chopra, the work of Wayne Dyer, the work of James Redfield, and many, many others, Greg Braden, and many others that have come after them, the work of you and I in getting ourselves more conscious, whether it be to save a tree, whether it be to plant fruit, whether it be to eat less animals, whether it be to have a different footprint, we, like it or not, are developing more consciously than ever before. And consciousness speeds up time, and consciousness helps enterprise, and consciousness cannot evolve unconsciously. So do your research, do your homework, read some wonderful old works, think more, talk more, have discussions at a higher level with some of your friends and family. Join some groups where higher discussions are being held at the moment, and do the work that sends you deep inside. Being a conscious leader is not saving the planet. Being a conscious leader is growing your own soul to live in the top two vibrations that we experience in life, and that is joy and love. Love and joy. In fact, joy is higher than love. So with that, I want to say goodbye to you all today. We're going to be back again tomorrow. I'm going to be sharing tomorrow how music interacts with business. I'm going to be sharing 8 modalities that exist in music, the work of Pythagoras, and how that can really, truly affect your business. And if your business is suffering a little bit at the moment, this is really going to help you. It's in the Conscious Leadership book. You can grab a copy and read that afterwards. We're going to have that special price there for the next week after the launch, before it goes back to the normal price. And thanks everybody for being on the call. We'll catch you all very much later on.